Welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is promise. Oh, promise is a good one, right? When's the last time you made a promise and did you keep it? Well, promises, what are they? Well, promises are the certainty that you actually create. Certainty is actually important, especially in this day and age, just for the fact that the world isn't exactly what most folks think it will be. But when they can rely on something that brings certainty, that brings comfort and predictability for them. So when you make a promise, you create certainty for other folks. Sometimes you create that certainty for yourself, especially when you promise yourself anything. So in order to have certainty, in order to create certainty and to create a promise, it requires that you have accountability. Now, what accountability is you taking responsibility. So when you make a promise, you have to make sure that that promise can actually be fulfilled. If you can't, then you're going to be making a false promise or something that's not going to hold a lot of water. It's not going to create a lot of certainty. And as a result, the promise is most likely something that won't happen. And we don't want to create those. We want to create promises that do happen. So you need to have accountability. You need to make sure you take responsibility. The next piece is a promise impacts your reputation. So when you put promises out there, your ability to fulfill them helps build your reputation. The reason that it does that is when you deliver a promise, you build trust. Now, when you do that for yourself, you build trust within yourself. When you do that for other folks, you build trust for those other folks. When people hear about the promises that you've made and that you've kept, you build trust, even with folks that you've never seen or met, just for the fact that your name's floating around and the promise that you kept and delivered floats around with it. So that's what a promise is. And it's so important. It's so important because it demonstrates who you are to not only yourself, but to other people. And that's something that can be incredibly important. Now, we don't necessarily just want to put promises out there. One reason I'm not a big fan of politics and some of the responses that you receive or some of the promises that you get where folks can't complete them or fill them out, or maybe you're in the bad environment where promises aren't important, is that when you can't keep a promise, it does something in the opposite direction of keeping a promise. So when you have a broken promise degrades trust. It's not something that you have a lot of faith in. It essentially erodes this certainty that you're working to create. So the challenge when it comes to making a promise is actually keeping it. You don't want to overpromise, or you don't want to promise on something you can't deliver, because you do that and then all the progress that you worked for starts going in the other direction. It starts going into degrading trust. It starts into eroding your accountability, and it creates a lot of uncertainty. And certainty is something that people can rely on and people can trust, and they want that, and that's important, and that's what we want to provide and build for them. So everyone appreciates a good promise, but no one likes broken promises, right? I think everyone can attest to that. So my story is the promise of the kids' room. And by kids' room, I don't mean a kid's playroom so much as a kid's sleeping room and sleeping area. So I'm going to take you down to what that actually is and what that looks like. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up with bunk beds. I remember being with my sister in a bunk bed. I know she had the top and I had the bottom. Actually, yes, I believe that's actually, I may have had the top. It's so long ago, I almost forget. But I know that that was something that I have a very fond recollection of. And in order to create that for my kids, I wanted them to have that same experience. Why? Because when we had bunk beds, I remember we had story time, and story time allowed us to just have our imaginations run wild. And my mother would actually, tell us stories, and that was a great time for me to really just connect with her and my imagination and everything that was actually going on. But these days, I wanted to make sure that my kids had the same opportunities that I had. So, as you can see here, I have my bunk bed project that I put together and picked up for my kids. And in keeping that promise, it was something that was very, very difficult to do. Why? Because I did my homework, but I wanted to pick out the right set of bunk beds. And the first set that I had picked up, fortunately I didn't put it together yet, would not have held my own weight on top, which meant that I wanted to have to pick something that was going to be sturdy and safe, because most likely I was going to be the one to change the sheets, change the beds, and I did not want the thing crumbling underneath my weight. If you ever saw the movie Step Brothers with the bunk bed incident, did not want that to happen to me. So I did a little bit more research, found an awesome, great deal at Costco, but sometimes we're tested, and that was my true test. I had to go with my son and my daughter, borrowed my wife's truck, and rented a U-Haul because we actually had to pick up the bunk beds themselves. Now, the challenge was that it was just the kids that went with me, and it was just me. And I tend to take a lot of things on myself. So to have the kids with me and to be picking up the bunk beds was a challenge in and of itself. So I can remember fondly picking up the bunk beds, which both of them were pretty heavy. I'm not sure the weight of the bunk beds themselves, but the top bunk bed can hold up to, I believe it's 300 pounds, and the bottom bunk bed can hold up to 500 pounds. So, considering they can hold that much weight, you can imagine how heavy they are. In addition to that, I actually found what was it? A dresser. So I found a dresser to go along with it. So that had some weight in and of itself. So somehow I managed to get all three of these things on a big Costco cart. And I can remember fondly, and I wish I had a picture of this, where stacked three high, the bottom bunk bed, the top bunk bed, and the dresser on one Costco cart. And I am pushing that down the aisle with one arm, had the other arm around my daughter holding her, and having my son walk beside me. Now, if you can picture this, this is the promise that I created, and this is what I was putting together for them. And man, it was going through my head, how am I going to make this happen? How am I going to get all this stuff out of Costco with my kids to the car, load it in the cart, and get it in the house? I didn't really know. I just knew I made a promise, and I was just going to have to wing it as I came to it. So the next part that I fondly remember was once we actually got everything to the truck, I made sure that instead of having to worry about my kids, I got them in the car. So they were both sitting in the car, and they were watching, some TV on one of the screens in there, and I attempt to load the back of the U-Haul. Needless to say, the weather wasn't looking too promising. The skies were very dark. It looked like a storm was about to hit, and that storm hit just as I was about to put all the equipment into the back of the U-Haul. Now, this is just me. I don't have any help. I just had to think, okay, how am I going to load this stuff in there? And I can remember the wind blowing really hard. I remember bags and debris just kind of like flying by me. And I'm working to get all this stuff in. And I'm on the last box. And as I'm dealing with the last box, it starts to pour, and the rain's coming down so hard, and the wind's coming down so hard that it's literally coming through sideways. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what am I gonna do? So I got the last box into the U-Haul, and then I literally got in the U-Haul myself and just stood there, just waiting for the storm to pass. I had no idea what was gonna happen. I just knew that was my only option. So my kids are inside. It's pouring rain. I mean, inside the car. It's pouring rain. They're watching TV. They're probably wondering where's dad. And I'm kind of huddled in this U-Haul looking out and just seeing, just torrential downpour, the wind. The wind was going so hard that I was shaking back and forth in the U-Haul because the U-Haul was rocking back and forth. So I was praying that the storm would pass, that I would still be intact so I could actually deliver this bunk bed. And there's this experience for my kids. And it suddenly subsided. And I was just like, whew. And then at that point, I was able to take back the cart. We got in the car. We came back home. And believe it or not, getting everything in the house was a lot easier. Actually, the garage. I'll take that back. The garage. It was a lot easier than I thought it was because I had already made it past that storm. That storm was the hardest thing I had to deal with in some time. So in doing that, sometimes the hard things that do happen end up creating a platform and a stepping stone for you to get to the next thing. And sometimes the early stuff that you thought was going to be maybe a little bit difficult or trivial may actually be harder than you thought it was. But the moment you can overcome that, it makes the next pieces and the steps much easier. And so I wanted to share that story with you so you had an idea of a promise that I kept. I was happy I was able to keep that promise for myself. That was probably more for me than my kids because my kids were like, bunk beds, big whoop. But once the bunk bed was in place, they were all over it, right? So in keeping that promise to myself, I was able to create certainty for what I wanted my kids to have and experience, and I was able to put that forward. And for me, I think my kids appreciate me a lot more to actually have the bunk beds and have them in place, but I appreciate myself even more for actually being able to keep that promise and do that for them. Because I want to be someone that they can rely on. I want to create certainty for my kids. And so that's why that's important to me. So, question for you, what creates certainty for you? What are you looking to deliver on? And how can you actually make a promise that you can keep? So I appreciate you tuning into this episode. Hopefully you learn a little bit more about me, the promises that I keep, especially for my family and for the folks I actually work with. And, well, hopefully you have something in your mind, in your head, as far as creating certainty for yourself, the ones that you love. And hopefully you're doing it. And if you need help with that, reach out to me. Ask me a question. So hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye.